Bravo! Today we'll carry on from period 7, and then I'm going 1917 to 1921. Kind of Wilson from World War I to the end of his term. We'll bring into the 20s, and we'll go over that on Tuesday and Thursday. My personal thoughts: there's definitely not going to be a progressive DBQ because they had one there from last year. It's good historical context. It's good stuff to know. So that's why we go over it. First thing I put up there again is the progressive amendments. And I left off the 19th Amendment there because I went over that in the last video. Just briefly, you should know the explanation. 16th Amendment, well, why a graduated income tax? Well, this comes from the populace so the federal government can be more effective. So there's more of a kind of equal distribution of the burden of taxes. That the more money you make, the more you're taxed from the government, so they can do their job. So they can, can be less corruption. There can be less of a burden. That's why they put it up there. 17th Amendment, a lot of states are already having a popular vote for senators by this time. This is not a new kind of concept, because instead of having the legislators and they can be kind of co-opted and kind of create some more corruption, maybe the people can vote by popular vote. And this is even from the 1820s, people proposed that there should be some kind of rule, maybe even an amendment to kind of revamp this kind of that the legislators appoint to senators. Now you make sure you understand that. You see the reform, it's more direct democracy, more representative democracy, when the people of the state can vote and choose for the senators instead of the General Assembly of North Carolina choosing the senators. It creates another layer, it creates another more kind of like the interest groups, but that's kind of, the idea behind it. 18th Amendment, that should be it's just a culmination over time from the 19th century, from the temperance movement, the anti-saloon league, making sure that this is, actually in a surprise way to some people that it passed so fast, it's ratified in 1920 of this, and that it is going to restrict the manufacture, consumption, and the sale of alcohol. And the Volstead Act is going to try to enforce it. And at least what we're going to talk a little bit more about the 1920s. The big thing that you are going to say, and that what's out there, it failed. It was a big mistake. It failed. Look, they even passed the 21st Amendment to revamp it. A lot of people supported this, and it did, again, lower the consumption of alcohol. I know in your brains, it's all the films, the speakeasies, it's all the gangsters and stuff, and everybody wants to say, because if on the street corner, what do you know about prohibition? Oh, that was the worst thing ever. Oh, okay, it probably, in hindsight, as far as the amendment for, the Constitution, yes, but as far as, again, a lot of people think alcohol is pretty bad. And still a lot of people think that today. If you think about things, maybe some people you can have a debate, it's even worse than some of the drugs that are illegal today have an effect on families. So don't go through this blanket kind of mindset and cliche, as I call these history cliches, that prohibition was, a terrible failure. Well, it's deeper than that. Again, I think, and reason why. Well, why did it pass so quickly? Matter of fact, they kind of, they did away with, really all alcohol. There was a lot of debate about having beer, maybe a certain alcohol content, but it passed pretty, quickly. And you have to say the subtle subtext of this, as we saw in the Prohibition videos from Ken Burns, the kind of his anti-immigrant as well, and it's after World War I. And we have the 16th Amendment. You can generate income, from another source besides from alcohol. So it all came together. It's nice to know all those nuances about the 18th Amendment. Bam. Why are we into the war? Wilsonian democracy, Wilsonian moral diplomacy, Wilsonian. And I use that name because it's a good adjective, because it's good to know. Make the world safe for democracy. We want to spread Americanism to the world. And I know it might be saying, make the world safe for hypocrisy. instead. That's what probably some of the people like definitely Latin America and nations around the world, especially even during the war with the Russians too as well, saying like, this is very, very hypocritical of what, Wilson is trying to say. Renewed unrestricted submarine warfare, that's probably one of the biggest kind of justification that Wilson is going to use as this kind of, he makes an address to Congress in January talking about peace without victory, but the Germans like, look, we want to try to end this war quickly here. And Wilson is trying to say, hey, like the War of 1812 in comparison, we need freedom of the seas. Right? British propaganda, the German Huns. The Germans are the bad guys, always in wars. Who are the bad guys, who are the good guys in that way. The Zimmerman telegram, I'm not going to go into details. That, to me, I think that really is a, one of the least reasons in a way here that you're getting into the war. We know that we don't really start into the fighting until 1918, and we kind of turned the tide. We did an effective job because it really the resources, and knowing that the Germans basically were the only one left fighting at this time, that even if they have one front, the time is up. There's no use of prolonging this war. They probably cannot outlast. People are starving at home and dealing out necessities. So, and that's why we were able to end it, 11th day, 11th hour, 11th month in 1918. Patterns here. Always know our patterns to get to the subset here. Civil liberties compromised, nationalism spreads, growth of executive and federal power, rationing, and revenue raising. This is right up here. We get the Espionage and Sedition Acts here, and that's one where that Schenck is kind of prosecuted and arrested for it, and the Supreme Court decides against him. You get and you said, what's the difference? Espionage is supposed to be the spying and that you're kind of going against your government in here. Sedition is supposed to be just any kind of America's viewpoint speech against the war, like a Eugene V. Debs. He's prosecuted under Sedition Act here. Committee on Public Information, George Creel and the Four Minutemen, what has happened domestically. No one of these from the Command Economy, the War Industries Board. It's kind of like compared to War Production Board in the World War II. Command Economies usually take on this. You get the Food and Fuel Administration, headed by Hoover. And you compare it to World War II, what's going to happen here. And you get, again, the rationing, you get the Victory Gardens, you get the Meatless Mondays, and you get war bonds. It's going to kind of get people used to investing and getting into, buying bonds and stuff. You know how that's going to end up for us. All right, so after the war, patterns that kind of continue, civil liberties and compromise, maybe part two, bust and boom, African Americans and women make gains, and you go to the demilitarization, return to isolationism. It's always a pattern up until World War II that we really demobilize and we demilitarize. After every war, it's like, all right, we don't have a large standing army and navy that kind of stays after the wars here, like a Great Britain, a France, or even a Germany if they could, in a way. Results: Red Scare 1, 1919, that kind of Russian Revolution from there. Palmer raids, all the deportations of my commie buddies like Emma Goldman gets going on. Even ones that are suspected of that, anything that's going against it. Immigration restrictions, you get the National Origins Act, 1921, Emergency Quota Act, 1924. They're going to do all this, and they're going to kind of hand it over to all this Red Scare stuff, and the Palmer raid is going to come to an end. But it's kind of handed over domestically by the groups like the KKK, and a lot of religious groups are kind of anti-Catholic, and anti-Jewish, and just anti-immigrants in a way. That fervor is going on here in the 1920s here. It's a very popular notion at the time, speaking of popular, is to restrict immigration. For the women, the 19th Amendment is passed, because again, I think war efforts by women and what their involvement helped convince people. That wasn't the only thing. It was Alice Paul and the protests as well, and plus a number of other grassroots. And it happened over time. You kind of get the return to, before that, with the African Americans, I just want to make this very clear. Great migration. This is great migration of African Americans coming from the South, coming to the cities. Most African Americans will remain in the South, but you're talking about millions coming towards the north over a period of time. to the early 1930s, but war was kind of like the catalyst, the kind of the enzyme that kind of sped up that kind of opportunity for African Americans. Say what's going to happen in World War II. There are several kind of great migrations by African Americans in spurts here, and that goes on here. And this was one of the big ones right here at this time to escape the lynchings, the persecution, the intimidations, and again the kind of pull factor of opportunities here that's going here, not only to the north but to the west as well. So it's not like, you know, just to the north. A return to normalcy with Harding said, forget all this progressive crap, government involvement. Let's just get back to neutrality. Let's get back to America, you know, first. And that was his campaign slogan, which is not even a word, but I mean, you know, again, it's very catchy. Very good to defeat the Democrats. So you're going to get Coolidge and Hoover and all the Republicans in the 1920s, and you'll get really the end of progressivism and kind of a more of like this pro-industrialization, Gilded Age 2.0. Let them handle all the things here. Enough all the unions, all the strikes that goes on during the war and after the war. Let's just, big police strike, let's get back. Just to get back to World War I, the Treaty of Versailles, you get the reparations towards, you know, Germany. They're gonna hit heavy, the war guilt, breakup of like territories and empires, and the League of Nations, part of Wilson's 14 points. And the big thing about 14 points, you don't need to know the 14 points. The big thing is self-determination, the freedom of the seas, no secret alliances on there. You don't need to know everything about the 14 points, all right, on there. And the last thing to end on today is the debate. You don't need to know, Mr. Price, Henry Cabot Lodge, was he a mild reservation, a strong reservation? Who's like an irreconcilable? Just recognize, you'll see documents if you more than anything, who's the ones who are not going to be for any changes for this, you know, Treaty of Versailles and the League of Nations. What is the big holding point and the big reservation about the Treaty of Versailles? It is in League of Nations, you don't have to remember this, Article 10, that we're going to be committed potentially to wars or conflicts that we can't decide upon ourselves. So that is the big, what about our self-determination, Woodrow Wilson? What about our own sovereignty? What about our own autonomy? And Wilson did not want to compromise one bit. He has the treaty, actually he tells the Democrats to vote against the treaty that with the large amendments on there. So, because he wants it in his form. He is stubborn, idealistic to a fault, and that's what and that's why he does not get his, realization. And again, I mean, his life ends what, 1924, 1925, but he suffers a stroke. It's very hard for him to go across the nation and get the kind of what he wanted with the League and the treaty passed. All right, a lot, but not that much in a way. Look at the annotations. Make sure you've looked at the first 5 minutes of this. Come back to this to take notes. I love you all. We'll go into the Roaring 20s tomorrow. So that's kind of, I can't wait. I love doing these little things, and I'm hoping some of you are getting something out of this. There's 10 trillion resources on the computer, on the internet, and whatever you may do, I am just another, resource that I'm hoping that you're using among all the other resources to get prepared for May 5th.